She didn't have to stop. That's the thing nobody talks about. Ifeoma didn't have to stop. It was 1 a.m., the rain was coming down in heavy sheets, and she had a warm apartment 15 minutes away. She was tired. She had worked a 12-hour shift. Her feet hurt. Her shoulders hurt. She had leftover jollof rice waiting in her fridge, and a phone full of unread messages she had been ignoring since Tuesday. She had every reason in the world to walk past the old man sitting alone on the bench outside the train station and keep moving. She stopped anyway. Because that is who Ifeoma was. Not a hero. Not someone looking for purpose. Just a woman who could not walk past suffering without acknowledging it. She had been that way since she was 7 years old and had given her lunch to a boy crying alone in the schoolyard. Her mother had scolded her for coming home hungry. Her mother had also cried a little, quietly, when she thought Ifeoma wasn't looking. He was soaked completely through. His shirt was plastered to his skin, his white hair flattened against his forehead, and he was sitting perfectly still, like the rain wasn't even happening. Like he was somewhere else, entirely. Ifeoma walked up to him slowly, crouched down to his level so she wasn't looming over him, and placed her hand gently on his back. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you okay?" He turned and looked at her. His eyes were distant, but not unkind. They were the eyes of a man whose mind was living in a different year. He looked at her face for a long moment, like he was trying to locate something familiar in it. "She forgot to come," he said. "Who forgot?" Ifeoma asked. He looked back at the rain. "She always comes. Every time. She never forgets." He paused. "She forgot tonight." Ifeoma didn't argue with him. She didn't try to explain that whoever he was waiting for was not coming at 1 a.m. in this rain. She just nodded and stayed crouched beside him, scanning him carefully the way she had learned to do in years of working with people who needed help they couldn't always ask for properly. She noticed the phone sitting slightly out of his jacket pocket. She noticed the wristband on his left wrist, and when she leaned closer, she could see a number engraved on the metal. Small and precise. An emergency contact. "Can I use your phone for a moment?" she asked. He didn't respond. She took that as permission, retrieved the phone gently with 2 fingers, and dialed the number from the wristband. It rang twice. A man answered. His voice was low and controlled, the kind of voice that had learned to give nothing away in its tone. "Yes." Ifeoma kept her own voice level. "I found an elderly man at the rain station. He's sitting outside in the rain completely soaked and he won't move to shelter. I'm calling the emergency number on his wristband. He needs someone to come get him. Please hurry." A pause that lasted less than 2 seconds. "Which station?" she told him. "Don't let him move." "I'm coming." The line went dead. Ifeoma put the phone back in the old man's pocket and sat down beside him on the wet bench. She pulled out her own small umbrella, opened it, and held it over both of them, even though she was already soaked through her jacket. The old man looked at the umbrella, then at her, then back at the rain. Something in his expression softened by a fraction. "You're going to get wet," he said. "I'm already wet," she said. He almost smiled. They sat in silence, and the rain came down, and Ifeoma thought about her jollof rice getting cold and thought about it anyway, and stayed where she was. 14 minutes later, the cars arrived. Not one car. 3 black cars moving fast. Headlights cutting hard through the rain, pulling up to the station entrance in a formation that felt practiced and deliberate. Men in dark clothing stepped out first, 6 of them, moving quickly and scanning the area with the systematic efficiency of people trained for exactly this kind of moment. They spread out without being told to. They checked sight lines, they communicated without speaking. And then the back door of the middle car opened and Jang Dong-soo stepped out. He was tall and sharp-jawed, dressed in all black despite the hour, and he moved toward the bench with the kind of purpose that cleared space without asking for it. Not aggressive, not showy, just absolutely certain of where he was going and completely uninterested in anything that might try to slow him down. His eyes found his father immediately, and something passed across his face, something real, and fast and completely unguarded before it was locked back down into control. He reached for the old man. Abeoji, let's go, come on. But Jang Cheol-soo didn't reach for his son. He reached for Ifeoma. His hand closed around her wrist with surprising strength, the grip of a man who had once been powerful and still had the muscle memory of it, and he looked at her with complete and total recognition. Not the foggy half-recognition of a confused mind. Complete recognition. His voice was soft and absolutely certain. Seoyona, let's go home. You're going to catch cold standing out here. The world stopped for 3 seconds. Ifeoma opened her mouth. I'm sorry. I'm not... Boss. One of the guards had appeared at Dong-soo's shoulder, materializing from somewhere close. The man's voice was barely above a whisper, careful and uncomfortable. The late wife. Dong-soo went completely still. He looked at Ifeoma, really looked at her, for the first time since he'd arrived, past the umbrella and the wet jacket and the stranger crouching on a bench in the rain. He looked at her face. Ifeoma looked back at him, Cheol-soo's hand still wrapped around her wrist. The rain still loud between them. She didn't know who Seoyeon was. She didn't know who this man was, or what those 3 cars meant, or why 6 men in dark clothing had materialized around a train station at 1 a.m. She knew none of it, but she was very good at reading rooms, and this room, such as it was telling her that something significant had just happened, and that she was standing directly in the middle of it. If you're watching this right now and something in your chest already feels tight, drop a comment below because this story has not even started yet. Subscribe. You cannot afford to miss what happens next. Dong-soo asked her to come with them. He didn't demand. He didn't use the 6 men in dark clothing as a suggestion. He stood in the rain with water running down his jaw and he asked, quietly, like it cost him something he hadn't budgeted for. Just until he calms down, please. Ifeoma looked at Cheol-soo. The old man was looking at her with complete trust, the certainty of someone who believed they had found something they had been looking for. She looked back at Dong-soo. His face was controlled, but his eyes were doing something more complicated. Just until he calms, she said. She didn't know that one word was about to reorganize her entire life. The house was the kind of enormous that didn't announce itself. No gold fixtures, no statement art, just space and quality and the settled weight of serious money that had been in one place long enough to stop trying to prove anything. Ifeoma walked through the entrance and kept her face neutral and her eyes moving. Staff appeared from different directions, all of them precise, all of them watching her with the particular attention of people trained to notice everything and reveal nothing. Ifeoma poured a cup for the old man and one for herself and let him talk. He talked about a garden. He talked about a woman who made a particular kind of soup that nobody else could replicate. He talked about a son who used to follow him to the market when he was small, gripping his hand with both of his, refusing to let go even when Cheol-soo tried to free his hand to carry a bag. He talked about the sound of rain on a particular roof. He laughed softly at something only he could see. Ifeoma listened to all of it, without redirecting him, without checking her phone, without giving any indication whatsoever that she was wet and exhausted and sitting in the house of someone she did not know under circumstances she had not chosen. She just listened. Because here is what Ifeoma understood that most people didn't. When someone whose mind is fracturing talks, they are not talking nonsense. They are talking about the things that mattered most, the things the mind holds on to when it starts releasing everything else. The garden, the soup, the small boy who held on with both hands. These were not random. These were the architecture of a life, the load-bearing walls. An hour later, Cheol-soo's eyes closed, mid-sentence. Ifeoma waited until his breathing deepened and steadied, then stood carefully and picked up her bag. He hasn't done that in 2 years. She turned. Dong-soo was standing in the doorway. He was looking at his father, not at her, and his expression had something in it she hadn't expected from the man who had stepped out of that car. Not power, not the cold efficiency of someone used to being obeyed. Something older and quieter and considerably more painful than both of those things. "Done what?" she asked. "Fallen asleep without a fight." A pause. "Since Seoyeon died, every night is a battle. He doesn't want to sleep. He gets agitated. Sometimes he cries." He stopped, looked at the floor briefly, looked back at his father. Tonight, he just talked himself to sleep like a child. He hasn't done that since... He stopped again. "Since she was alive," Ifeoma said. He didn't answer, which was an answer. "He thought I was someone safe," she said. "People sleep when they feel safe. It's not complicated." Dong-soo looked at her then. Full attention, the kind that felt like something being aimed. "You work in healthcare," he said. It wasn't a question. He had clearly already found out. "I do," she said. "Is that why you stopped tonight? Professional instinct?" She considered him. "I stopped because he was alone in the rain," she said. "That's all." A silence settled between them. "Thank you," he said. It moved through his mouth like something unfamiliar. "Good night," she replied. She left, and she drove home with her wet jacket leaving a damp patch on her car seat, and she thought about an old man who held her wrist like she was something he had been looking for. She thought about a son standing in a doorway looking at his sleeping father with an expression that had no business being that unguarded on a face that controlled. She told herself she wouldn't go back. She lasted 3 days. Dong-soo had found her. She had not been surprised by this. He was the kind of man who found things when he decided to look for them. He appeared outside her workplace with the quiet certainty of someone who had planned the conversation and was simply waiting for the right moment to deliver it. He offered her money. He was straightforward about it. Regular visits. His father had been asking about her. He would compensate her properly for her time. She refused the money so quickly and cleanly that it visibly recalibrated something in his reading of her. "I'll visit," she said, "because he needs someone to sit with him, not because you're paying me." She watched something shift behind his eyes. He nodded once, controlled, carefully neutral. What she didn't see, because she had already turned to walk back inside, was the way he stood on that pavement for a moment longer than necessary, trying to locate a category for her that made sense in his understanding of how people worked. He couldn't find one. And so the visits began in earnest. She came every 2 or 3 days. Cheol-soo called her Seoyeon every single time without exception. Every single time, she said gently, "I'm Ifeoma," and every single time he smiled with the patience of someone who found her insistence charming and slightly misguided and called her Seoyeon again. She stopped correcting him after the 3rd week. Not because she was surrendering to his version of reality, but because she understood something. He wasn't confused about who she was in the way that mattered. He knew she was safe. He knew she came back. In the part of him that still functioned with full clarity, he had already decided who she was to him. Names were just names. Safety was not. Now here is where it gets interesting, and here is where I want you to pay attention, because this is the part that is going to split the comment section completely in half. Dong-soo was cold to her, not threatening, not aggressive, but deliberately, consistently, almost architecturally cold. When they crossed paths in the house, he gave her the minimum. Clipped answers, brief acknowledgement, the specific politeness of someone who has decided to keep a person at a measured distance and is very practiced at maintaining that measurement. He watched her with his father from other rooms, from hallways, from angles that she was clearly meant to notice, so she understood she was being observed. Half of you watching this right now think that is completely reasonable. He doesn't know her. She appeared out of nowhere at 1 a.m. She is in his house, around his father, in the space where his dead wife used to exist. His caution makes sense. His coldness is protective. The other half of you think he was being unfair to a woman who went out of her way to help his father in the rain, refused his money and kept coming back out of genuine care, and that his coldness was arrogance dressed up as caution. Drop your take in the comments. I genuinely want to know which side you're on, because Ifeoma had her own take, and her take was this. She didn't need his warmth. She wasn't there for him. She would do what she came to do, and his temperature was his own business. She didn't flinch at him. She didn't perform extra warmth to counteract his coldness. She didn't shrink. She walked into that house every visit with the same even steadiness she had crouched down to the bench in the rain, and she did what she came to do, and she went home. And that, more than anything, was what was quietly undoing him. Because every woman who had ever entered Dongsu's world had adjusted to him, had calibrated herself to his temperature, had performed whatever was needed to occupy comfortable space near him. And here was this woman who simply did not do that, who moved through his house and sat with his father and drank her tea and went home and came back and did it again, and seemed to require absolutely nothing from him. He didn't know what to do with that. 6 weeks in, Ifeoma stayed late. Cheol-soo had been energetic, wanting to show her things. Old photographs in frames, a chess set he claimed he had won in a legendary bet that Ifeoma suspected grew more legendary each time he told it. A painting in the wide hallway that he touched the frame of with the particular care of something significant. Before that, earlier in the evening, Cheol-soo had produced the chess set with the enthusiasm of a man issuing a challenge. He placed the board between them with ceremony and sat back and looked at her like she had already lost. "Do you play?" he asked. "A little," she said, which was not entirely true. They played for 40 minutes. Cheol-soo played with the focused intensity of someone who had been doing this for 60 years and found it deeply serious. Ifeoma held her own longer than he expected. She could see the surprise on his face when she took his bishop, and then he proceeded to dismantle her quietly and completely with the satisfaction of a man who had been waiting to do exactly that. "You let me take the bishop," she said when it was over. "I did not," he said serenely. "You absolutely did. It was deliberate." Seoyeon always accused me of the same thing. He began resetting the pieces. "I simply play better than people expect. It is not my fault that people underestimate me." Ifeoma laughed. "Another game." "Obviously," he said, "she lost that one faster." He was delighted. Later, when Dongsu passed the doorway and saw his father's expression, he stopped. Cheol-soo was explaining to Ifeoma in great detail why her endgame strategy was fundamentally flawed and what she needed to study before she embarrassed herself further. And Ifeoma was listening with her chin in her hand and the specific expression of someone being thoroughly lectured and finding it completely acceptable. Dongsu stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he moved on without saying anything. But something in him had shifted by a fraction he would not have been able to measure. "Seoyeon chose this one," he said. "She stood in front of it for a very long time before she decided." Ifeoma looked at the painting. It was a landscape. Very still. Very green. Rolling hills and a pale sky, and the suggestion of water somewhere in the lower right corner. "She had good taste," Ifeoma said. "She said it looked like somewhere you'd want to have a picnic." Cheol-soo smiled at it. "She had very specific ideas about picnics." Dongsu appeared beside her without warning. She hadn't heard him come. She registered his presence without reacting to it and kept looking at the painting. "There's a small gallery near Insadong," he said. He was speaking to the painting, not to her. She spent 40 minutes in front of it before she decided. 40 minutes. I timed it because I couldn't understand what she was seeing that was taking so long. "What did she say when you asked her?" Ifeoma said. "She said I was looking at what was there, and she was looking at what—" It made her feel a pause. "I didn't really understand that then." "Do you now?" He was quiet for a moment. Some things take time to understand. Ifeoma looked at the painting. The still green hills, the suggestion of water. "Did you ever take her? To a picnic somewhere like that?" The silence that followed had weight. "No," he said. There was always something more urgent. Ifeoma let that sit. She didn't fill it with comfort or with blame. She just let it be what it was. "There's always something more urgent," she said finally, "until there isn't." She walked back toward the sitting room. Dongsu stood in the hallway alone and looked at a painting his dead wife had chosen and understood, perhaps for the first time, exactly what she had seen in it. But while all of this was happening, while Ifeoma was listening to old stories, and Dong-su was quietly dismantling his own walls, something else was in motion. Inside the house, someone was watching Ifeoma with a completely different quality of attention. Not Dong-su's reluctant fascination, not the staff's cautious curiosity. Something colder and more calculating than any of that. Park Seon-jae had been with the Dong-su for 11 years. He was smooth in the way that very dangerous things are sometimes smooth, with a pleasantness that covered everything so completely that you had to look very carefully to see what it was covering. He had a smile that arrived faster than any genuine emotion could produce, and he deployed it constantly, reflexively, like a tool. He watched Ifeoma visit, and he did not see a kind woman sitting with a lonely old man. He saw a foreign woman with unrestricted access to a house she had no business being in, daily proximity to Jang Cheol-soo, hours alone with him, and whatever the old man said in his unguarded hours, whatever fragmented memories surfaced, whatever pieces of information his disintegrating mind released without choosing to, this woman was there to receive all of it. Reports began going up a chain that did not include Dong-su. It was one of those reports, 3 days before he approached her outside the house, that confirmed to Seon-jae that the old man had been talking, that the woman was listening, that history was developing the specific shape he had been afraid of since the first week she arrived. Ifeoma noticed things during her visits, the way certain people notice things, not by looking for them, but by simply being present and paying attention. A hallway near the east wing that the staff navigated with a consistency that felt trained rather than habitual. Photographs in the main sitting room turned face down on the shelves. Several of them, which could mean grief but could also mean concealment. A door that was always locked when every other room in the house moved freely around it. She noticed all of it. She said nothing. She filed it away in the quiet part of her mind that collected things without announcing them. These were observations. She was not looking for anything. There is a difference between a woman who investigates and a woman who simply pays attention, and Ifeoma had always been the second kind. Then one afternoon, Cheol-soo had one of his clear moments. She had learned to recognize them, a quality of light coming back into his eyes, a precision in his movements, a different texture to his silence before he spoke. He turned to look at her, and she could see him fully present, sharp and certain, and temporarily returned from wherever the fog took him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask," she said. "Are you afraid of my son?" She considered this honestly. "No." He nodded slowly. "Good. He's not frightening. He just learned to look frightening because it was necessary." He folded his hands in his lap. His mother died when he was 12. He decided that day that he would never be unprepared for loss again. You cannot be unprepared for loss and be soft at the same time. So, he chose a pause. He made the wrong choice, but he was 12 years old, so I forgave him. Ifeoma sat with that quietly. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "Who was Seoyeon?" The window stayed open. He didn't drift. He looked at her with full, steady clarity, and the expression that moved across his face was love, pure and sharp-edged and slightly painful. "She was the best thing that came into this family in my lifetime," he said. "She saw my son clearly, all of him, the frightening parts, and the 12-year-old underneath them. And she chose him anyway." His jaw tightened by a fraction. She found out the truth about what was happening inside the organization. She was trying to get to Dong-su to tell him. She was so close. He stopped. Ifeoma's chest was very still. "What happened?" "They got to her first," he said. "They called it an accident." His voice was perfectly flat. It was not an accident. He reached under the cushion of his chair, the chair he always sat in, and pulled out a folded piece of paper and a photograph. He pressed both into Ifeoma's hands with the careful deliberateness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Keep these," he said. "Don't show anyone in this house. When the time is right, you will know." The window began to close. She could see it happening, the light going gradual and soft again, the precision loosening at the edges. "She made very good soup," he said, softer now, returning. You should ask her for the recipe sometime. Ifeoma sat with the paper and the photograph in her hands and the stone weight of the word they sitting in her chest, where it had been since the first time he'd said it. Not someone. They. She put both items in her bag. She did not look at them yet. She was not sure why she was waiting, only that something told her the moment for looking had not yet arrived. She was right, and she was in more danger than she knew. Cheol-soo has been carrying this for 2 years, trying to deliver a message through a fog that keeps rolling back in. And what Ifeoma is about to find in her bag is going to change everything in this house. Drop your prediction in the comments right now. Do you think Dong-soo will believe her when she shows him what his father has been holding? Subscribe so you don't get cut off before the answer arrives. 3 days later, Park Seon-jae was waiting for her outside the house. He was leaning against the wall near the entrance with his hands in his pockets and his smile already on, assembled and ready. And when he saw her approaching, he straightened up with the easy warmth of a man who had prepared the next several minutes very carefully. "Miss Ifeoma," he said, "do you have a moment?" "You're already taking one," she said pleasantly. He laughed like she'd said something charming. "I wanted to say personally how much we appreciate everything you've done for Chairman Jang. You've been so generous, so patient with him. This family is grateful." He paused. The smile held. "But I've been thinking about you, honestly. This environment, it can be very complicated. There are dynamics here that are difficult to understand from outside. For someone in your position, someone not from this world, the longer you stay involved, the more complicated it becomes." Another pause. "It might be better, safer, truly, to start thinking about wrapping things up. The chairman has excellent care here. You've done more than enough." Ifeoma looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the smile. She looked at what was behind the smile and found nothing behind it. Absence. A wall painted to look like a room. "Thank you for your concern," she said. She got in her car and drove to Dong-soo and told him every word before the engine had finished cooling. She sat across from Dong-soo in his office and delivered it with complete precision. The exact words, the pauses, the smile, the particular warmth of the warning. She watched his face while she spoke. He listened without moving. When she finished, he called Park Seon-jae into his office. Seon-jae arrived with a smile. He sat down. He was smooth through the entire conversation, explaining gently that he had only been worried for Ifeoma's comfort, that a foreign woman in a complicated environment, he had simply wanted to be honest with her about the landscape. Surely that was understandable. Dong-soo looked at him for a long time. "Don't approach her again without my knowledge," he said. "Of course, boss, of course. I apologize if it came across badly." He left. The smile accompanied him down the hallway and around the corner. Ifeoma was in the hallway outside the office when Seon-jae passed her. He nodded politely. She nodded back. She watched his face as he walked away, from behind, where he couldn't see her watching. His shoulders had not changed by a single degree. He was not sorry. He was not even slightly recalibrated. He had gone into that office, performed the appropriate response, and come out completely unchanged. That told her everything she needed to know. She went back to the sitting room. Cheol-soo was napping. She sat in the quiet and thought carefully, and when Dong-soo appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, she looked up at him. "He's not afraid of you," she said. Dong-soo was very still. "What?" "Park Seon-jae, when you reprimanded him just now." She kept her voice even. A man who respects the authority of the person correcting him changes. His posture changes. His pace when he leaves the room changes. Something in him acknowledges the correction. She paused. "He walked out of your office exactly the same as he walked in." Dong-soo stared at her. "I'm telling you what I saw," she said. "Do with it what you decide." The room was very quiet. Then Dong-soo sat down across from her for the first time, not in a hallway, not in a doorway, but actually sat down in the same room as her, and they looked at each other across the sleeping figure of his father. "Who are you?" he said, not threatening, genuinely asking. I'm the woman who sat in the rain with your father, she said. That's all. He shook his head slightly. That's not all. She didn't answer. She looked at Cheol-su sleeping in his chair and thought about a piece of paper in her bag that she still hadn't opened. That night, she nearly died. She was walking to her car after the visit. The street was quiet, well lit, completely ordinary. She had her keys in her hand, and she was thinking about what she needed to buy at the market, and she heard the engine before she saw the car. Fast. Too fast for this street. Coming from the left. She moved. The car missed her by less space than she wanted to calculate. She felt displaced air against her face, felt her own heartbeat in her teeth, felt the keys drop from her hand, and heard them hit the pavement somewhere in the blur of the next 2 seconds. She pressed against the wall of the building, breathing. She stood there longer than she thought. When she finally looked at her hands, they were not shaking, and she was not sure if that meant she was brave or simply in shock, and she decided it did not matter right now. What mattered was the next step. She had always been good at finding the next step. The car did not stop. It turned the corner and was gone, and the street went back to being quiet and ordinary, like nothing had happened at all. She stood against the wall for 30 seconds. Then she picked up her keys and she drove, hands perfectly steady, to Jang Dong-su's house. She walked into his office without knocking. He looked up. He read her face in the first second. He was around the desk in the second, hands on her shoulders, scanning her the way she had scanned Cheol-su in the rain. Are you hurt? No, I moved fast enough. What happened? She told him. He listened, and the temperature of the room dropped steadily with each sentence. By the time she finished, his hands on her shoulders were very tight, and his jaw was set in a way that she suspected meant something specific to people who knew him. Ifeoma. He said her name with a weight she hadn't heard in it before. Dong-su. She looked at him directly. Sit down. I need to show you something. They sat at the desk. She reached into her bag and placed the folded paper and the photograph on the desk between them. Your father gave me these last week, she said. He was very clear when he gave them to me, more clear than I'd seen him. He said, don't show anyone in this house. She paused. I think you are the exception he meant. Dong-su looked at the items on the desk. He picked up the photograph first. He turned it over. He read the back. She watched something move through him, something that had no name but was visible in the stillness that followed. Then he put the photograph down with extreme care and unfolded the paper. The office was completely silent. She watched him read. She was very good at watching people because she had spent years in rooms where understanding a person's face in real time was part of the work. She watched Dong-su read, and she saw the moment the words landed, not the beginning of the letter. The moment somewhere in the middle when his hands went still, when the controlled exterior found something it could not quite contain. He read it again from the beginning. When he looked up, his eyes were doing several things at once. She had not seen his eyes do several things at once before. They had always been singular in their expression. It's Seoyeon's handwriting, he said. She waited. She wrote this the night before she died. He placed the letter on the desk with the deliberateness of someone being very careful about what their hands were doing. She knew something was going to happen to her. She wrote everything she had found out. Every name. Every account. Every transaction. He stopped. Then, Park Seonjae. The name sat in the room. He's been dismantling everything from the inside for 3 years, Dong-su said. His voice was quiet in the way that was more frightening than volume. Rerouting funds, building external alliances, using my organization as infrastructure for a takeover that was going to happen slowly enough that by the time I saw it, there would be nothing left to recover. He was looking at the letter. Seoyeon found the trail. She found all of it. She was trying to reach me. And he found out she knew, Ifeoma said, before she could get to me. A pause so long she could hear the house around them. They called it an accident. I know, she said. Your father told me. He looked at her sharply. He had a clear moment. He told me she found out the truth and they couldn't let her live. She held his gaze. He's been trying to tell you, Dong-su, that's what he's been carrying. Every difficult night, every agitated evening, every time he grabbed your arm and tried to talk. She paused. He knew. He has been knowing. And everyone around him decided that what he said could not be reliable. She watched it land on him. The full weight of it. 2 years of his father trying to break through. 2 years of careful, patient redirection from everyone who had decided the old man was too far gone to be believed. Dong-su put both hands flat on the desk. She knew who to trust, Ifeoma said quietly. She didn't give it to a lawyer. She didn't hide it in a safe. She gave it to the one person no one would think to look at and no one would think to search. She glanced at the photograph. The back. What does the back of the photograph say? He turned it over, read it again. His jaw moved. He will keep it safe, he said. He always kept everything safe. The silence that followed was the kind that only happens when something enormous has just been understood. She trusted him, Ifeoma said. Completely. And she was right. Dong-su was very still for a very long time. When he spoke, his voice had the texture of something that had been broken open. He tried to tell me, every time I visited, he would hold my arm. He would start to say something, and I would. He stopped. I would redirect him. I would be patient, the way you're patient with someone you've already decided isn't going to make sense. He stopped again. I decided before he even spoke. You didn't know, she said. He's my father. You didn't know. She said it again, not to excuse it and not to dismiss it, but because it was simply the true thing, and she was a woman who had learned that true things needed to be said clearly. He looked at her across the desk. She looked back. And in the space between them was everything that had been building since a rain-soaked bench at 1 a.m., the two of them on opposite sides of a sleeping old man, finding their way toward each other through the most complicated possible route. What do you need from me right now? She asked. Nothing, he said. I need to handle this. I know, she said. I'm asking about right now, this moment, before you go handle it. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in him was working very hard to stay assembled. Stay, he said. Just for tonight, don't go back to your apartment tonight. Okay, she said. It was the second time she had agreed to something simple, that was not simple at all. Here is where I'm going to need you to drop a comment, because this moment right here, this man asking this woman to stay just for tonight, is going to mean different things to different people. Some of you think this is the moment the story became something more than it should be. Some of you think this was the most human moment in the whole story, and it was long overdue. Some of you are asking why she said, okay, so quickly, let me know what you think. The comment section is about to be divided, and I want to read every single opinion. What happened over the next 72 hours is the kind of thing that happens in the dark, and does not need the bright light of telling to be understood. Park Seon-jae was brought to account with the particular thoroughness of a man who had discovered that the person who murdered his wife had been sitting at his table for 2 years. The alliance Seon-jae had built was dismantled from the inside out. The people who had chosen his side found the weight of that choice arriving for them swiftly and without ceremony. Dong-su moved through those 72 hours as a man who had been given something back. Not Seo-yeon. She was not given back. But the truth of her. The truth about what happened to her. The ability to understand the last 2 years of his father's anguish as the thing it actually was, a man trying desperately to deliver a message through a fog that kept rolling back in. That was given back. Ifeoma stayed in a safe house she had never seen before. It was quiet and comfortable and completely ordinary, which she was grateful for. 2 guards outside who did not bother her. She read. She called her mother and did not explain where she was or what had been happening, because her mother was a woman who worried with her whole body, and there was no need for that. She sat by a window in the early mornings and watched the street and thought about the direction of her life. She had come to Korea on a 2-year contract. The contract was ending. She had planned her departure months ago. Her boxes were half packed. Her goodbyes at work were already in motion. She had a life to return to, and it was a good life, a chosen life, a life that fit her. She sat by the window and thought about an old man who had said her actual name in a garden, clear as water, before the fog came back. She thought about good things are coming, and wondered if she had walked toward them, or if they had been arranged for her, long before she made any choices at all. On the third day, Dong-soo came to the safe house. He looked like a man who had not slept, and was not going to discuss it. He sat across from her and told her it was done. She nodded. "I want to offer you something," he said. "Don't," she said. He looked at her. "You haven't heard what it is." "It's money, or protection, or a house and soul, or some combination of all three," she said. "I don't want any of it." "Then what do you want?" She didn't hesitate. She had known the answer to this question for weeks. "Make sure he is never alone in the rain again." Something happened in his face that was too private to look at directly. She looked at her hands instead, and gave him a moment. "That I can promise," he said. "That one I can promise with my whole life." She nodded once and looked back up. They sat in the quiet of the safe house, and looked at each other, and there was nothing left to perform between them. No coldness, no careful distance, no management. Just two people who had arrived at a moment of complete honesty through a route that neither of them would ever have chosen, and both of them were obscurely grateful for. "You're leaving," he said. "My contract ends," she said. "I was always leaving." "I know." He looked at his hands briefly. "I knew from the beginning you were always going to leave. I think that's part of why He stopped. "Part of why you kept your distance," she finished. "Yes." "That," she said, "is the saddest reason for distance I have ever heard." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you telling me it was avoidable?" She looked at him steadily. "I'm telling you it was a choice." He sat with that. "There are things that would not be simple," he said. "If you stayed, or came back. My life is not a simple life." "I know what your life is," she said. "I've been inside it." And she stood up and picked up her bag. "And my answer to a question you haven't asked yet is that I don't know. I need to go home first. I need to stand in my own life for a while, and see what I find." She looked at him. "But I'm not running. I want you to know the difference." He stood. He walked her to the door of the safe house, and they stood there in the ordinary light of a regular afternoon. "Go and come back," he said. "I make no promises," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking." She went to say goodbye to Cheol-soo the following morning. He was in the garden, in the chair someone had placed in the warmth of the morning sun, talking quietly to the plants with the comfortable authority of a man who had been having this conversation for years. He looked up when she came through the garden door and his whole face opened. "Seoyon ah," he said. "Come sit. The tomatoes are being difficult again." She sat beside him. She let him tell her about the tomatoes. She let him tell her about the trip with the very blue water, the story getting slightly longer than the last time she'd heard it. The water bluer, the weather better. She let him tell her about a small boy who held on with both hands. She was preparing herself to say goodbye when Cheol-soo reached over and took her hand. He held it for a moment. Then the window opened. He looked at her and said, clearly, without any fog, "Ifeoma." She went completely still. He smiled. A real smile, full and warm and entirely present. "Good things are coming," he said. "I want you to know I'm sure about that." "Are you?" she said. "I am." He patted her hand. "My son is a good man. He just forgot how to show it for a while. Don't give up on him too quickly." "I'm not giving up on anything," she said. He nodded, satisfied, and then the window closed and his eyes went soft and he looked at the tomatoes and said, "Seoyon, do you think they need more water?" "Probably," she said. She fed him breakfast. She stayed an extra 2 hours. She watered the tomatoes with him. When she finally stood to leave, he held her hand for a moment, just a moment, and then released it with a gentle certainty of someone who knows a thing is not ending. She walked out of that garden and through the house and got into her car and drove 2 streets away and parked and sat there for 5 minutes with her head against the steering wheel before she started driving again. The airport was full and loud and indifferently busy the way airports always are. She checked in. She cleared security. She found her gate and bought bad coffee and stood looking at the departures board and thought about all the times in her life she had made a decision by moving forward and not looking back. She heard the footsteps behind her and knew them before she turned. Jang Dong-soo. No guards, no cars, no performance. Just a man in a coat slightly too light for the weather, standing in an airport, looking at her with an expression that was not asking her to stay. "You said you weren't here to stop me," she said. "I'm not," he said. He crossed the space between them and reached into his inner pocket and held out a small envelope. She took it. His fingers brushed hers when she did, and neither of them commented on it. "My father had a very clear morning yesterday," he said. "Clearest in months. Long window. He talked for almost an hour." He paused. "He told me things about Seoyeon I didn't know. Things she had told him near the end. He had been holding all of it." Another pause. "He said he was glad it was you. That Seoyeon would have known to pick someone who was stubborn enough to sit in the rain." Ifeoma pressed her lips together. "He also said to tell you that good things are still coming. He was very emphatic about that part. He said to make sure I got the emphatic part across." She looked at the envelope in her hands. "Dong-soo, yes. Say the thing you came to say." He exhaled. A man who had controlled rooms, who had controlled organizations, who had controlled the expression on his own face since he was 12 years old, stood in an airport arrivals hall and said with complete simplicity, "I don't want you to go." "I know," she said. "That's all you're giving me?" "I told you I make no promises. Now. Right here. This is the moment that is going to split every single person watching this story directly down the middle. Half of you think she is being unfair. That this man stood in a public airport without his guards, without his armor, without anything except honesty, and she gave him almost nothing back. That he deserved more than I know and no promises. That after everything, she owed him at least a door left open. The other half of you think she was right. That a woman does not owe a man warmth simply because he finally decided to be vulnerable. That her restraint was not coldness but self-protection. That she had already given this family more than anyone asked her to. Tell me which half you are in. Drop it in the comments right now because I genuinely need to know. "You also told me you're not running?" He looked at her. "I'm holding on to that." "You should," she said. The boarding announcement came over the speakers. Her flight. She looked at the gate. She looked at him. He was not asking her to stay. He was standing there being exactly what he was, a complicated man with a complicated life who had somehow found his walls taken apart by a woman who had simply refused to be impressed by them. He was not asking her to stay. He was just making sure she knew he wanted her to. She stood on her toes and pressed a brief, light kiss to his jaw, felt him go completely still, stepped back and picked up her bag. "Make sure he eats breakfast," she said. "He tries to skip it." "I know," he said. "He told me this morning. He also said you cheated at chess." She laughed. "I did not cheat. He is genuinely excellent at chess." "He says you moved his piece when he wasn't looking." "I would never." Dong-soo almost smiled. The almost smile that she had been watching become more actual for weeks now. She turned and walked toward the gate. She did not look back. She had learned long ago that some decisions required a specific direction of motion, and looking back was not part of it. She found her seat. She settled in. She waited until the plane was climbing and the city was falling away beneath her in its neat, organized lines before she opened the envelope. Inside was the photograph. Seoyeon and Cheol-soo, both laughing at something beyond the frame. Joy captured in a single second. On the back, in Seoyeon's handwriting, he will keep it safe. He always kept everything safe. Below that, over the existing writing, in shakier letters, recent. Written with the specific careful effort of a man fighting to make his hands do what his mind needed them to do. Thank you for sitting in the rain with me. And beneath that, one more line, slightly uneven, full of love. My son is afraid of goodbyes. Be patient with him. Ifeoma pressed the photograph to her chest and she cried. She cried the way she had not cried once through all of it. Not in the rain, not when the car almost hit her, not reading Seoyeon's letter over Dongsu's shoulder, not in the garden when Cheol-soo said her name with perfect clarity. She cried now, at altitude with bad airline coffee going cold in the tray beside her, properly and completely and without holding anything back. Then she wiped her face. She looked at the photograph again. She turned it over and read every word one more time. Her phone buzzed before the signal dropped entirely. Unknown number, she knew. He had eggs this morning. 2. He complained about them extensively. I believe this means he enjoyed them. She typed back through tears that were mostly finished now. Good. Make sure he goes outside in the morning. He likes the sun on the left side of the garden. The tomatoes also need attention. A pause. Then, I know. He told me this morning. He also said Seoyeon used to sing to them and that I should consider it. She laughed out, loud. The passenger beside her glanced over. She didn't care even slightly. She typed. He's not wrong. Plants respond to sound. Dongsu, I am not singing to tomatoes. Ifeoma. You don't have to, but don't say I didn't tell you when they underperform. A long pause. Then, come back when you're ready. No pressure, no timeline, just come back when you're ready. She looked at the message until the signal dropped and the screen went to airplane mode and the city was entirely gone beneath the clouds. She held the photograph. She thought about an old man in the rain who had held her wrist like she was someone he'd been waiting for. She thought about a son who had stood in a doorway, looking at his sleeping father with an expression that had no business being that unguarded. She thought about a woman named Seoyeon, who had trusted a man with dementia to keep the most important thing she had ever found because she knew, absolutely, that he would hold it safe. She thought about good things are coming. She thought that maybe Cheol-soo had been right in the way that mattered most. Not about her name, not about who she was, but about the fact that she was someone safe, someone who came back, someone who sat in the rain. She thought maybe she had been those things for longer than she knew, and that this family had simply been the place where all of it was finally needed completely. She would go home. She would stand in her own life. She would let herself remember and decide and breathe. And then, when she was ready, she would come back. Some people walk past. Some people stop. Ifeoma stopped, and because she stopped, an old man got home safely. A dead woman's truth finally reached the person it was meant for. And a man who had been afraid of goodbyes since he was 12 years old stood in an airport and said the only honest thing he had left. If this story reached something in you, you already know why. Drop a comment right now. Tell me what hit you hardest. Tell me whether you think she goes back. Tell me whether you think Dong-soo deserved her patience or whether she gave too much to a man who gave her coldness for weeks. This comment section is yours, and I want to read every word. Share this with someone who needs it. Like this video so more people find this story. And subscribe because the next story is already waiting and it will find you at exactly the right moment. Some people walk past. Be the kind who stops.